Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, just to run quickly through the process. The process would have started with the Ministry of National Security giving approval for exemption to the closed border rule. Once that was done, the ship is required to submit a certain amount of documents that looks at the crew and the passengers on the ship, whether there's any illness on the ship, and if there are any incidents during the passage of the ship, where the ship is coming from, and all the ports that it has called at. Once that meets our approval, and that initial approval is based on the fact that we don't think that there is any illness on board the ship. Once that meets our approval, then the ship is allowed to come into port. The next point would have been that we would have boarded the ship to do an inspection for ourselves, but we delayed that for a day because we needed to make sure that there were certain things in place to ensure the smooth processing of persons when they come off the ship, and to have the facilities ready for them at the hotel to also ensure that there's monitoring in place. When the ship came in, the documentation that was provided did indicate that there was a sick person on board, and arrangements were made for that person to be transferred to the Cornwall Regional Hospital. The medical officer of health for the parish of Trelawney boarded the ship and did inspection with the port health staff. And at that point, in recognition of the fact that according to the Quarantine Act, some of the rules there states that if a ship is coming from a port where there is infection, then the ship would be held in quarantine. So that means that we would not grant permission for persons to disembark the ship freely. The ship would not be granted pratique. That is a word that we use. And the ship would have been held in quarantine. So quarantine orders were placed on the ship, which means that no persons would be allowed to disembark the ship for the next few days while it is that we carry out the necessary investigations. However, in the processing, in order to get the Jamaicans to disembark, we made certain stipulations in terms of the quarantine orders that were placed that would allow the Jamaicans to disembark over a period of days in batches of 200. Many persons are concerned about the fact that we're only allowing 200 persons to come off, and I've seen questions where persons are asking if it is that we have the capacity to test over 1,000 persons per day, why not test everybody per day and allow persons to come off? However, it is not just the testing that has to take place. We do have to go through a process where persons are interviewed. We do get the paperwork, but we do have to do a personal interview as well to ensure that everything is in order. We have to do some sensitization of persons. We know that a big part of us being able to control what is happening in Jamaica in terms of spread has been because of public education programs. And so we want to ensure as well that these persons, during the interview and after the interview, that we provide some information about COVID-19 and also about what is happening in Jamaica and how it is that we prioritize certain actions, why it is that we have to put them in quarantine, what would happen that would make them go into isolation, for them to generally feel comfortable with the process that they are entering into. So once the persons come off, and that would start tomorrow. So today they are being processed by PICA, and PICA would go, PICA is the Immigration Agency and Customs Agency. They would go through their process today for 200 persons, and tomorrow we would be ready to start the disembarkation of those 200 persons. Once it is that they come off, they will be sampled. The samples will be collected from them, and then quarantine orders will be served, and they will be transported to a quarantine facility where they will remain for 24 to 72 hours until we get back their results. When we get back their results, then arrangements will be made for home quarantine for these persons depending on the results. If we have persons that are positive, then of course these persons will be isolated. Considering the risk that there will be in having persons in home quarantine, we will do quite a bit of sensitization with the persons once they are at the hotel, for them to understand their personal responsibility as well. And we will enter into an arrangement where they will be monitored for the period that they're going to be at home. The next 200 persons will disembark on the following day, and the same process would occur. And we go through that process until all persons have disembarked and have gone through sampling and have been released into home quarantine.
The technology that will assist the process, however, the monitoring that is, will begin with our Jam COVID app, which will be placed on a smartphone and will require that individual, in keeping with taking personal responsibility, to provide periodic updates in terms of temperature checks and so on. And we will have to depend on individuals to be faithful to the requirements that will be placed to them as a condition of them going home. Beyond that, though, in time to come, we intend to deploy another technology device that would be more secure in terms of affixing it to the individual. And if that individual were to move out of a particular space or tamper with the device, then it would provide a signal to the monitoring infrastructure to respond. That is a more secure arrangement, but that is in train and not yet available. So for now, it's really the arrangements on the Jam COVID app, and it's going to require a lot of personal responsibility.
The app will have a geofencing feature in there that pings the person in a specific location every 30 minutes. If the person is outside of the area of the geofencing, the ping will alert a central point where the JCF will be alerted to the fact that the person has moved out of the specific geolocation. All persons who will disembark will be asked to give consent to their being tracked in this way. The app will also, at random times during the 14 days, send you a text, at which point in time you will need to make a video call on the app, and then it will identify your location, and it will ask you to certify certain information at that geolocation.
Thank you. But again, the personal responsibility cannot be overemphasized, because if it's a phone, it means that you have to have the phone with you for you to be geofenced. One could be creative, and the phone could be one place and the individual another place. So while the app does work and is an effective tool, it definitely requires the personal responsibility. The other device would be more difficult for one to separate oneself from the device, which is why we're making arrangements for that device. So there are some risks, that's the point. But we will depend on the faithfulness of the individuals in their own interests to move the process forward.